There are moments when a single heartbeat can change the course of an entire life. In a world often too hurried to notice the quiet battles fought by broken hearts, this story stands as a whisper against the noise, a reminder that true love never abandons, even when the world does. Today, I invite you to step into a journey filled with loss, hope, and redemption, wrapped in the bond between a little girl and a dog who never stopped believing. Watch until the very end, because hidden within every scar is a lesson worth learning and a miracle worth witnessing. The morning fog lay thick over Woodland Creek, swallowing the streets and houses in a soft, heavy shroud. It was the kind of fog that muted every sound, where even footsteps seemed to vanish into the mist before reaching any ears. Outside the old rescue shelter at the edge of town, a small figure stood motionless, barely a ripple in the sea of gray. Emily Carter, just 7 years old, gripped her mother's hand with all the strength her tiny fingers could summon. Her coat, a faded pink one she'd refused to replace despite the tears at the sleeves, barely shielded her from the damp cold, yet she made no complaint. She had not spoken a word in over 6 months. Her mother knelt down beside her, brushing a lock of light brown hair from Emily's forehead. "We don't have to go inside if you're not ready," she whispered, her voice careful, as if the wrong tone might shatter the fragile thread holding her daughter together. Emily gave no response, not even a blink. She simply stared ahead at the shelter's entrance, where a battered wooden sign creaked in the slight breeze. Woodland Creek Animal Rescue Center. 6 months ago, the world had shifted under Emily's small feet. First came the fire, the flashing lights, the endless wail of sirens. Her father, a brave firefighter and her biggest hero, had not come home. Days later, in the confusion and the endless river of grief, Blaze had disappeared. Her faithful companion, a German Shepherd therapy dog her father had lovingly trained for her, was gone without a trace. Since then, Emily had retreated into a silence so complete that even her laughter, the music that once filled their home, became a memory so distant it hurt to recall. Today was supposed to be a small step. Maybe look at a few dogs. Maybe pet one, if she wanted. Maybe feel something again. That was what the grief counselor had suggested. No pressure, no expectations, just presence. Inside, the shelter was eerily quiet. No excited barking, no pawing at gates. The few dogs there seemed subdued, as if the mist outside had seeped into their bones too. A volunteer smiled gently at them, ushering them past rows of clean but barren kennels. Then it happened. From deep within the shelter, past the last row of cages, a sound tore through the stillness. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't quite a howl either. It was something roar, something that vibrated with agony and yearning. It was a sound that carried with it the weight of countless lonely nights and broken promises. A sound that seemed to claw its way through the thick air, reaching for something or someone. Emily froze. Her mother's fingers tightened protectively around hers, instinctively stepping in front of her, shielding her. But Emily, for the first time in half a year, moved. She pulled away. Eyes wide, heart pounding, Emily turned toward the source of that desperate cry. Her legs, stiff from so many months of inactivity, stumbled forward as if they were not her own. The sound came again, sharper now, closer. It was not just a cry of pain. It was a cry of recognition. And from somewhere deep inside her, past all the walls she had built, past the sorrow that had taken root, Emily found her voice. "Blaze!" she cried out, her voice cracking, unfamiliar even to her own ears. The name echoed through the empty corridor, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Her mother called after her, but Emily didn't hear. She ran, feet slapping against the tile floor, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. She did not think. She did not doubt. Something ancient and undeniable guided her, a thread spun from memories of sun-drenched afternoons, of a warm muzzle pressing against her cheek, of a low, steady heartbeat that once lulled her to sleep when the world became too loud. Past the cages she ran, past the bewildered volunteer, until she reached the final door, marked isolation. Her small palms slapped against the heavy metal, rattling it in its frame. Through the small barred window, she could just make out a shadow, large, trembling, and unmistakably familiar. The sound came again, softer this time, a whine of hope. Emily's chest ached. Tears blurred her vision as she pressed her face against the window, straining to see through the grime. "Blaze," she whispered, voice trembling, her breath fogging up the glass. Inside, the shadow shifted. Slowly, cautiously, a massive German shepherd stepped into view. His fur, once gleaming with health, was now matted and dull. Scars crisscrossed his legs. His amber eyes, though dimmer, lit up at the sight of her. Recognition. Joy. Pain. Blaze pressed his nose against the glass, whining frantically, his entire body quivering with emotion too large for words or barks. Emily dropped to her knees, placing both hands flat against the door as if willing it to dissolve between them. She sobbed, great wrenching sobs that shook her small frame, but she didn't look away. She couldn't. Behind her, the shelter staff had gathered, murmuring in disbelief. They had labeled Blaze too damaged for adoption. They had almost given up hope he could ever bond with anyone again, but here he was, crumbling before a little girl's touch, through a sheet of metal and glass. Her mother approached slowly, tears filling her own eyes at the sight. She knelt, wrapping her arms around Emily from behind, offering support, but not pulling her away. "Mom," Emily choked out between sobs. "I found him. He waited for me." And somewhere above them, it felt as if a crack had opened in the thick gray sky, letting the first sliver of light through. It was the morning when silence was broken. The morning when two lost souls found their way back to each other. The morning when hope, against all odds, whispered, "I am still here." The world tilted and spun backward, folding in on itself like pages in an old book, carrying Emily Carter 6 months into the past to a memory that still burned with the heat of 1,000 suns. It had been a dry summer, the worst Woodland Creek had seen in over 20 years. Fires raged through the forests, devouring everything in their path. Emily remembered sitting by the window, clutching her stuffed rabbit, watching the sky turn a sickly orange, as if the sun itself had fallen from the heavens and set the world ablaze. Her father, Captain Jonathan Carter, was one of the town's most respected firefighters, tall, strong, and always smiling. He was the kind of man who made you believe everything could be fixed with just a steady hand and a kind word. To Emily, he was more than a hero, he was her anchor, the one person who seemed to understand her world of quiet patterns and overwhelming sensations. When the fires were finally tamed, the town threw a celebration, a bittersweet gathering of survival and gratitude. That was the night her father knelt before her in the backyard, soot still smudging his face, his uniform smelling of smoke and ash, and handed her a bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. Inside was Blaze. The tiny German shepherd pup looked up at her with wide, solemn eyes, as if he already knew he had a purpose far bigger than himself. Emily, who struggled to look strangers in the eye, who trembled at the chaos of crowds, reached out without hesitation. Their bond was instant, as natural as breathing. "This little guy made it through the fire," her father had said, voice thick with emotion. "He's a fighter, just like you, Emily. I want you to remember something, always. Protect those who can't protect themselves. That's what we do. That's what makes us strong." She had nodded, a serious little thing, placing one hand over Blaze's tiny beating heart. It became their silent pact, woven into her soul as tightly as the lines in her favorite storybooks. In the weeks that followed, Blaze became more than a pet. He was her tether to the world beyond her own mind. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at age 4, Emily often found human interaction overwhelming, unpredictable, but Blaze was different. Blaze was steady. His warm presence calmed the storms raging inside her. His gentle nudge grounded her when colors became too bright or sounds too loud. With him, she learned how to breathe through panic attacks, how to navigate the confusing maze of daily life. They were inseparable. Where Emily went, Blaze followed, to the park, to therapy sessions, even to the grocery store where the fluorescent lights and endless hum used to send her into trembling fits. With Blaze, the world was not just survivable, it was beautiful. But life, as Emily would learn all too soon, could be cruel beyond measure. The accident that took her father was swift and senseless, a collapse during a routine inspection. No grand heroics, no final words, just a call in the middle of the night, a knock on the door, and a mother crumpling to the floor in grief. Emily did not understand, at first, how could the man who had promised to always come back be gone? How could the world keep spinning when he was no longer in it? At the funeral, while others wept and spoke in hushed tones, Emily stood silent, clutching Blaze's leash so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could not cry, she could not speak, but deep inside, she made a vow. She would protect Blaze. She would guard him with the same fierce loyalty her father had shown to everyone he saved. It was the only way she could honor him now, for a time. That promise gave her strength. Then came the second blow. It was a chilly afternoon, just beginning to hint at winter. Emily and her mother had taken Blaze for a walk along the wooded trails near their home, a place her father had loved. The trees whispered in the cold wind, and Emily, bundled in her favorite scarf, felt the first tiny flicker of peace since the funeral. That peace shattered in an instant. A screech of tires, a flash of silver as a speeding car tore down the narrow path. Blaze barked once, a warning, and then the leash was yanked from Emily's grasp. She screamed his name, running after him, heart pounding in her ears. But the car was already gone, and so was Blaze. Search parties combed the woods. Flyers were posted. Hope was clung to with bloodied fingernails. But days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of him. Emily retreated into silence. To her, Blaze had not just been lost, she had failed him, failed her father, broken the sacred promise. The guilt gnawed at her. Burrowing deep into the spaces grief had already hollowed out. She could not speak, because the words inside her were too heavy to lift. She could not smile, because joy felt like a betrayal. She withdrew from the world, folding herself into the smallest corners, hoping to become invisible. She let go of friends, of school, even of the things she once loved. There was only the memory of a broken promise and the endless, aching question, why? It was this silent burden she carried into the foggy morning at Woodland Creek Animal Rescue. It was this wound that throbbed beneath her skin when she heard the desperate cry from the isolation room. And it was this promise, battered but not forgotten, that would soon demand to be kept. Because sometimes, when the world burns down around you, all that remains is the promise you made and the hope that somehow you might still keep it. The fog clung low over Woodland Creek Animal Rescue, casting a gray hush over everything as if the world itself was holding its breath. Inside the rescue's main hall, the silence was broken only by the soft hum of overhead lights and the occasional muffled sound of animals stirring in their enclosures. Catherine Wilson adjusted the sleeves of her worn cardigan, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She had worked at the rescue center for nearly 15 years, but some days still felt harder than others. Today was one of those days. When she had first heard the desperate howl from the isolation wing, the wing reserved for the deeply traumatized or aggressive cases, she had expected the worst. Blaze, the large German shepherd rescued from unknown horrors, had been labeled a danger, deemed too unpredictable for adoption. No one was allowed close without thick gloves and 2 handlers present. But as Catherine rounded the corner, what she saw rooted her to the spot. A little girl, no more than 7, stood frozen before Blaze's reinforced kennel. Her small body was rigid with emotion, her wide eyes locked onto the dog's trembling form behind the glass. And Blaze the dog, who had lunged at seasoned handlers, who had snapped at the walls themselves in terror, was no longer the fearsome creature they all knew. He was kneeling. The massive dog, scarred and ragged, slowly, deliberately lowered himself onto his front paws, tail tucked tightly, ears pinned flat against his head. His eyes, those wild, mistrusting eyes, shimmered with a pain so raw it seemed almost human. He let out a low whine, a sound full of sorrow and desperate longing. and pressed his forehead against the glass barrier separating him from the girl. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She had witnessed hundreds of reunions between people and pets, some joyful, some bittersweet, but nothing like this. She watched as the little girl, tears already streaming down her face, stumbled forward, her small hands flattened against the glass. Right where Blaze's head rested, it was a silent plea, a reaching across the chasm of 6 broken months. And then, for the first time since stepping foot into Woodland Creek, Emily Carter's voice broke free. "Blaze," she sobbed, voice high and broken, filled with months of suppressed agony and hope. "Blaze, you came back." The weight of that moment nearly buckled Catherine's knees. Her mind raced. Protocol was clear: no contact without supervisor approval, especially not with a dog flagged as high risk. If she breached it, she could lose her job. Worse, if something went wrong, if that fragile girl got hurt. Catherine would never forgive herself. But another part of her, the part that remembered holding her own son once, remembered the way he had clutched her hand during thunderstorms, the way he had trusted her to make the world safe, screamed louder than the rules. She moved before she could second-guess herself. Catherine crossed the short distance to the kennel door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her fingers hovered over the key ring at her waist, hesitating for only a breath. Then, with a trembling hand, she unlocked the heavy door and swung it open, just enough for Blaze to slip through. At first, Blaze did not move. He simply stayed crouched, trembling, waiting, as if unable to believe that the barrier was truly gone. Then Emily stepped forward, arms open, body shaking. It was as if the universe itself exhaled. Blaze surged forward carefully, almost reverently. He pressed his massive head against Emily's chest, releasing a shuddering whimper. Emily crumpled to her knees, wrapping her small arms around his scarred neck, burying her face in his thick fur. Sobs racked her tiny frame, the kind of deep, unfiltered crying that only comes from a heart that has been too long broken and suddenly finds a piece of itself returned. Blaze did not move, did not pull away. Instead, he remained utterly still, allowing Emily to cling to him, grounding her in a way no one else had been able to since her father's death. Tears blurred Catherine's vision. She wiped them away roughly, but more kept coming. It was not sadness. She felt it was something far deeper, a sacred kind of awe, the witnessing of 2 fractured souls finding each other again in a world that had tried so hard to tear them apart. Around them, the other animals watched in silence, as if sensing the enormity of the moment. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time seemed irrelevant in that space, where grief and hope collided. Finally, Emily pulled back just enough to look into Blaze's eyes. "I missed you," she whispered hoarsely. "I tried to find you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Blaze let out a low, rumbling sound, not a growl, but something softer, almost like a sigh. He nudged her hand with his nose, a simple gesture of forgiveness, of unconditional love. Catherine knew then, beyond any doubt, that Blaze was not dangerous. He was not broken beyond repair. He was simply lost, like Emily, waiting for the only person who could make him whole again. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Catherine knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on Blaze's back. His ears twitched, but he made no move to resist. "You're home now," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Both of you, in that moment, under the sterile glow of the rescue center lights, surrounded by the quiet breaths of 100 watching animals, Catherine believed in miracles again, because sometimes the ones who have been hurt the most still find their way back to the ones who love them, scarred, but not defeated. And sometimes, when the world says give up, love says, try one more time. Later that afternoon, when most of the visitors had left and the rescue center grew quiet once more, Catherine sat hunched over a worn wooden desk in the back office. The flickering computer screen bathed her weary face in pale light as she combed through Blaze's intake notes, cross-referencing them with old reports. Something gnawed at her, a growing unease she could no longer ignore. Blaze's condition, the erratic aggression, the deep-seated fear responses. The strange scars was not typical of simple abandonment. It was something much darker. With a deep breath, Catherine pulled on a pair of latex gloves and returned to the holding area where Blaze now lay curled around Emily, who had refused to leave his side. Gently, she motioned for Emily's mother, Lauren, to step closer. "I need to examine him more closely," Catherine said quietly, her voice thick with the weight of what she feared she would find. Lauren nodded, kneeling down and whispering reassurances to Emily. After a moment, Emily reluctantly shifted to give Catherine access to Blaze's battered body, her small hand still clutching a clump of his thick fur. As Catherine worked, she cataloged the evidence with a sinking heart. Tiny puncture wounds, almost invisible, lined the soft skin beneath Blaze's thick coat, far too many to be accidental. Thin, ropey scars crisscrossed his inner thighs and belly, marks left not by injury, but by repeated invasive procedures. Blaze flinched slightly as her fingers brushed against a hairless patch just above his right flank, where the fourth port had likely been inserted. Catherine sat back on her heels, heart pounding. It was worse than she had dared imagine. She beckoned Lauren aside and, in a low voice meant to spare Emily's already battered heart, shared her grim theory. "Blaze wasn't just lost," Catherine whispered. "He was taken." "Used," Lauren paled. "Used how?" Catherine swallowed hard. "There's been rumors. Underground clinics, illegal drug trials. Blaze's injuries suggest he was a test subject for experimental therapies. From the pattern of the scars and the placement of the punctures, I would bet they were testing renal detoxification treatments, extremely painful, often leaving the animal in a constant state of illness and confusion." Lauren pressed a hand to her mouth, horror flooding her features. She glanced back at her daughter, who was curled against Blaze as if willing him to stay by sheer force of love. "They tortured him." Lauren choked. Before Catherine could respond, a soft gasp made them turn. Emily had heard. The little girl's face crumpled, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Without hesitation, she threw her arms tightly around Blaze's thick neck and buried her face in his fur. "I'm so sorry," she whispered brokenly, rocking slightly as she clung to him. "I should have found you sooner, but I promise, I'll keep you safe now. I swear it." Blaze let out a low, rumbling sound, somewhere between a whine and a sigh, and nuzzled closer to her, his entire body trembling from exhaustion and emotion. Catherine's chest tightened painfully at the sight. She crouched down beside them, resting a gentle hand on Emily's thin shoulder. "You didn't fail him, sweetheart," she said softly. "You're saving him now. That's what matters." Lauren knelt on Emily's other side, wiping her own tears away. She had lost so much already: her husband, their financial stability, her daughter's laughter. Yet somehow, in this fragile, broken reunion, she found a spark of hope flickering anew. "We're going to help him," Lauren said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Catherine hesitated. She hated to crush their hope, but reality loomed large. "The treatments he needs," Catherine said carefully, "are expensive. Advanced therapy, specialized care. It won't be cheap. And there's no guarantee." Lauren's jaw set in a grim line. "We'll find a way." Her words rang out into the quiet room with a fierceness that surprised even Catherine. It was the kind of vow made not with money or power, but with raw determination, the kind of promise only a mother could make. Emily lifted her tear-streaked face, her expression fierce despite the redness of her eyes. "I'll help too," she declared, her voice trembling but strong. "I can sell lemonade or draw pictures for people. Anything." Catherine smiled through the ache in her heart. "You have a brave spirit, Emily Carter." The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden rays through the dusty windows of the rescue center. The world outside continued its indifferent march forward. But here, in this small forgotten corner, three broken souls wove a new promise. They would not let Blaze's suffering be the end of his story. They would fight together. As Catherine rose to her feet, a spark of something fierce and protective ignited in her chest. She would rally her connections, call in old favors, do whatever she had to do. Blaze deserved that chance. Emily deserved that chance. And deep down, she believed, maybe for the first time in a very long while, that love could still triumph over cruelty. Because sometimes It was not the strongest or the wealthiest who changed the world. Sometimes it was the ones with broken wings and shattered voices, clinging to hope with bloodied hands, who built something beautiful from the ruins. And sometimes all it took to light the way back was a little girl's unwavering promise and a dog's broken, beating heart. Word of Blaze's return spread through Woodland Creek like wildfire. At first, it was just murmurs, curious glances, whispered questions, but within days the small town had divided sharply, a rift opening up along old invisible lines that no one had thought much about until now. One half of the town, led by a chorus of nervous parents and stern officials, insisted that Blaze was a danger. They pointed to the town ordinance that had been passed 2 years ago, banning German shepherds, citing outdated fears about aggression and public safety. To them, Blaze was not a hero who had survived unimaginable cruelty. He was a threat that needed to be removed. At the head of this movement stood Mayor Donald Davis, a stern, heavy-set man with a booming voice and a reputation for being immovable once he made up his mind. He had championed the shepherd ban after an unrelated incident years ago, and now saw Blaze's presence as a direct challenge to his authority. "He's a liability," Mayor Davis thundered during a heated town hall meeting. "We cannot put our children at risk just because of a sentimental story. Rules exist for a reason." The other half of the town, however, saw something different entirely. They saw the way Blaze pressed his battered body against Emily's small frame, shielding her like a knight sworn to protect a queen. They saw the way Emily, who had not spoken a word for 6 long months, now whispered to him with a heart so full of hope it made even the hardest faces soften. And so, quietly but fiercely, they began to rally. Flyers appeared overnight on the lampposts downtown. "Support Blaze and Emily. Community fundraiser Saturday." Local businesses pledged portions of their proceeds to help cover Blaze's growing veterinary costs. High school students organized bake sales and car washes. Even Mrs. Green, the no-nonsense librarian who once fined Emily $5 for late books, posted a sign at the checkout counter, "Donations for Blaze welcome." But the town's division cut deeper than simple arguments. At school, Emily found herself walking a tightrope between two worlds. Some children avoided her entirely. Their parents' fearful warnings echoed in their quick footsteps and wide eyes. A few classmates whispered cruel things behind her back, ugly words that bit into her already fragile spirit. One afternoon, as she sat alone on the cracked stone steps outside the cafeteria, Emily overheard a group of mothers talking in sharp, cutting tones. "That Carter girl should know better," one woman said, arms folded tightly across her chest, "bringing a vicious dog back into this town. It's irresponsible. It's dangerous." Another agreed, "I won't let my son anywhere near her." Each word was a stone thrown at the wall Emily had so carefully rebuilt around her heart. But she didn't cry. Not anymore. Instead, she tightened her fists in her lap and whispered the words she had etched into her soul the night her father first placed Blaze into her arms. "I promised." Those 2 words became her shield, her armor against the cold stares and harsher words. She had promised her father she would protect the weak. She had promised Blaze she would never leave him behind again, and she would keep that promise, even if it meant standing alone. Blaze waited patiently for her outside the school gates every afternoon, his body still weak but his spirit unbroken. His presence was a comfort no one else could offer. When Emily climbed onto her bike and pedaled home with him trotting carefully at her side, she felt the heavy burden of loneliness lift just a little. At home, Lauren did everything she could to shield Emily from the growing tensions. She fielded angry phone calls and concerned emails, weathered accusations with a patience born of love and fear. Money was tight, painfully so, but she refused to let that stop her. "We'll find a way, baby," she told Emily one evening, as they sat together patching up old backpacks to sell at the flea market. "We have something they don't. We have heart." The battle lines sharpened as the community fundraiser approached. Flyers were torn down as quickly as they were put up. Accusations flew. Tempers flared. And through it all, Emily and Blaze stayed side by side, 2 wounded souls, stubbornly refusing to let go of each other. When the day of the fundraiser finally arrived, dark clouds loomed low over Woodland Creek, a mirror of the tension hanging in the air. Yet despite the threat of rain and the not-so-subtle disapproval of the mayor, dozens of townspeople gathered in the park, setting up booths and tables covered with handmade crafts, baked goods, and simple signs declaring their cause. Emily stood in the middle of it all, Blaze's head resting against her side, feeling both terrified and fiercely proud. She could see the disapproving glares from across the street, where Mayor Davis stood with his arms crossed and a deep frown etched into his face. But she could also see smiles, the real kind, faces lit with kindness, hands reaching into pockets to donate whatever they could spare. They were here for her, for Blaze, for the promise that love could be stronger than fear. That afternoon, as raindrops began to fall in gentle, misty sheets, Emily looked up into the stormy sky and thought of her father. She tightened her hold on Blaze's leash and whispered so softly that only he could hear, "We're not alone." And for the first time since she had lost him, Emily truly believed it. The annual spring festival at Woodland Creek had always been a beacon of warmth after the long, bitter winters, a time when the whole town came together in celebration. Colorful tents fluttered in the crisp breeze, children ran laughing between booths, and the scent of roasted corn and fresh pies filled the air. Despite the undercurrent of tension that still lingered because of Blaze's presence, most townsfolk tried to lose themselves in the festivities. Emily clutched Blaze's leash tightly as she and her mother navigated the bustling crowd, earning a few cautious stares but also a handful of tentative smiles. Lauren squeezed her daughter's shoulder gently, wordlessly encouraging her. At the center of the park, the lake, a broad, shallow basin that had only recently begun to thaw, glittered under the pale sun. A thin sheet of ice still floated precariously on its surface, cracking slightly with each new warm day. Signs had been posted everywhere, warning everyone to stay away, but excitement sometimes outpaced caution. Near the edge of the lake, a group of children had gathered, daring each other closer to the shimmering ice. Among them was a boy in a bright red jacket, Sam Davis, the mayor's grandson. His curly blonde hair bounced as he laughed and edged closer, teasing his friends with bold steps. "No one's brave enough," he shouted, sticking his tongue out playfully. Before anyone could stop him, the ice beneath Sam's boots gave a sickening crack. In a heartbeat, he plunged into the freezing water, the shattered ice clattering around him like broken glass. For one awful moment, there was nothing but silence, horrified, breathless silence. Then came the screaming. Parents and vendors rushed toward the shore, their faces twisted in panic. Sam's small hands thrashed desperately, his head bobbing in and out of the water. The icy shock had stolen his strength almost instantly. He wouldn't last long, but no one moved to help. The lake was too dangerous, the ice too unpredictable. Fear rooted the crowd in place, their feet frozen to the ground just as surely as the water froze around Sam. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to do something, anything. She looked at Blaze, who stood rigid beside her, his body vibrating with tension, eyes locked on the struggling boy. And then Emily remembered the signs her father had taught her, the hand signals, used to guide Blaze in emergencies. Without hesitating, she dropped to one knee and signed, "Go, save." Blaze didn't need more. With a powerful lunge, he broke free from her side and tore toward the lake, his paws flinging up arcs of cold mud. Gasps erupted from the crowd as the German Shepherd charged headlong onto the brittle ice. The ice cracked ominously under his weight, but Blaze didn't slow. He moved with calculated precision, stepping light where the ice was thick, plunging through where it was weak. A few feet from Sam, he dove headfirst into the frigid water. Blaze's powerful jaws clamped gently onto the back of Sam's jacket. Kicking furiously, he dragged the boy through the broken ice, each movement agonizingly slow against the biting current. Emily stood trembling at the shoreline, her hands clasped tightly over her mouth. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, the entire town holding its collective breath. Finally, with a final heave, Blaze pulled Sam within reach of the nearest adults. Two men waded waist deep into the water, hauling the shivering boy onto dry land. Sam coughed violently, water pouring from his mouth, but he was alive. Blaze struggled after him, soaked to the bone, his sides heaving with exhaustion. Emily sprinted forward, heedless of the icy puddles soaking her sneakers. She dropped beside Blaze, wrapping her arms around his wet neck. "You did it," she whispered fiercely. "You saved him." Around them, the crowd erupted not in anger, but in stunned applause. Mothers wept openly. Fathers clapped each other on the backs. Even Mayor Davis, who had pushed hardest for Blaze's removal, stood slack-jawed and silent, watching as his only grandchild clung to life because of the very dog he had condemned. Someone snapped a picture of a small girl in muddy sneakers, cradling a soaked German shepherd, both of them framed by the sparkling shards of shattered ice. The image would spread like wildfire across the town and beyond, carried on social media, printed in newspapers, whispered in stories for months to come. For in that frozen moment, the impossible had happened. A town's fear had been broken. A little girl's bravery had ignited something stronger than prejudice, and a battered, broken dog had become a hero. Later, as Sam warmed by a fire wrapped in thick blankets, he clutched Blaze's fur weakly and smiled a soft, grateful smile that melted even the hardest hearts. Mayor Davis approached Emily with hesitant steps. His voice, when he spoke, trembled with something dangerously close to shame. "You saved him," he said, voice thick. "Your dog saved my grandson." Emily looked up at him, her small face solemn, her arms still locked tightly around Blaze. "He's not just a dog," she said. "He's family." The mayor looked at Blaze, who lay stretched out in exhaustion, and for the first time truly saw him, not as a danger, but as a life worth saving. And slowly, one by one, the people of Woodland Creek began to understand it too. The weeks following the spring festival felt like a slow but steady awakening for Woodland Creek. News of Blaze's heroic rescue had spread beyond the town limits, carried by whispers, news articles, and the hearts of those who had witnessed it. The tide of fear and prejudice, once so heavy and immovable, began to recede under the growing weight of gratitude and admiration. Mayor Davis, a man once proud of his steadfastness, found himself confronting a truth far deeper than any policy he had ever signed. His grandson Sam was alive today because of a dog he had once labeled as dangerous, as unwanted. The guilt gnawed at him each sleepless night, until he knew there was only one thing he could do. On a brilliant Saturday afternoon, with the spring sun gleaming down and the scent of fresh blossoms filling the air, the entire town gathered once again this time, not to celebrate tradition, but to right a wrong. A makeshift stage was set up in the town square, decorated with modest banners and a single large sign that read, in bold letters, "Honor and Healing." Mayor Davis stepped up to the microphone, the lines on his face deeper than ever before, not from age, but from a newfound humility. He cleared his throat, his hands trembling slightly as he looked out over the sea of familiar faces, and then down to the front row, where Emily sat, her small hand resting protectively on Blaze's thick fur. "Today," he began, voice steady but thick with emotion, "we gather not just to celebrate bravery, but to acknowledge the mistakes of fear." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I stand here to say I was wrong," he said, the crowd murmuring softly. "I was wrong to judge without understanding. I was wrong to let fear lead instead of compassion." The entire town seemed to lean forward, hanging on his every word. And so, effective immediately, the breed-specific ban on German shepherds and similar dogs is hereby lifted. We will no longer judge a soul by the way it looks or by the scars it bears. A ripple of applause grew into a thunderous ovation. Some wiped away tears. Others simply smiled, their hearts lighter. But the mayor wasn't finished. He turned toward Emily and Blaze, beckoning them onto the stage. Lauren gently urged her daughter forward, and Emily, shy but determined, climbed the few steps with Blaze faithfully at her side. Mayor Davis knelt down, holding out a small velvet box. Inside, resting on a bed of deep blue satin, was a shining gold medal engraved with one word, valor. "For acts of extraordinary bravery," the mayor declared. his voice breaking slightly. "We award Blaze and Emily Carter the Medal of Courage." The crowd erupted again, a standing ovation this time, and for a moment, the little girl and her battered dog were the shining center of the universe. Emily, clutching the medal tightly, was asked if she wanted to say a few words. She hesitated at first, her eyes wide, then nodded solemnly and stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was small but clear, and every ear strained to catch her words. "When you love someone," Emily said, her hands trembling slightly as she stroked Blaze's ears, "you don't see scars. You don't see fear. You just see someone who needs you to believe in them." A hush fell over the square. In that simple, earnest truth, Emily spoke to something deep within every listener: the buried wounds, the quiet hopes, the desperate need for redemption that all souls, young and old, carried. She finished softly, almost whispering, "Blaze never gave up on me, and I'll never give up on him." No grand oration could have moved the town more. As the ceremony ended, families poured out into the surrounding fields, children laughing as they chased each other through the wildflowers. Musicians struck up cheerful tunes, and the scent of warm bread and fresh lemonade drifted once again through the spring air. Off to the side, away from the noise and celebration, Emily knelt beside Blaze. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of gold and crimson. She leaned close to his ear, her breath stirring the damp fur, still carrying the faint chill of the lake. "I kept my promise, Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of all she had carried. "We kept it." Together, Blaze wagged his tail weakly, nudging her hand with his nose as if he understood every word. Without thinking, Emily unclipped the leash, and Blaze, now fully healed, bounded forward into the open field. Emily laughed a pure, unguarded sound and chased after him, her arms stretched wide like wings. The townsfolk watched, some with smiles, others with tears they didn't bother to hide, as the little girl and her loyal dog raced across the golden meadow, their shadows long and free against the setting sun. It wasn't just a game. It was a declaration of love stronger than loss, of hope born from heartbreak, of promises made and kept against every odd. And as Emily and Blaze disappeared into the embrace of the endless fields, the town of Woodland Creek understood something they would never forget: that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe in someone who has been broken, and that in doing so you just might heal yourself. As the sun sets over Woodland Creek, we are reminded of an old truth. The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. These words, once spoken by Nelson Mandela, echo through the hearts of Emily and Blaze, and now, perhaps, through ours. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and be part of this growing community where every story carries a piece of hope. Your support helps me continue creating meaningful videos filled with light, love, and the resilience of the human and canine spirit. Stay until the last scene, because sometimes the most beautiful endings are the ones we fight hardest to believe in.